everybody. This is Jen Kleinhens.
And I'm Rob Vose.
And you're listening to another episode of Everybody Hates Your Brand, a podcast where we talk about our thoughts and opinions on marketing, from customer experience to brand and everything in between. Join us today as we talk about the purpose of brand purpose.
So, one of the things we try and do with this podcast is to sort of take issues of the day and discuss them and talk about them through our own experiences and through doing some research. Yes, we do actually research for this show. People might be surprised to know. And one of the things that's been doing the rounds for a while now, and has caused some quite sort of interesting debates, is this concept of brand purpose. So for those of you not in the know about what brand purpose is, essentially brand purpose is why your business does what it does. What is the motivation behind what it does? And the idea with purpose is it's something of a higher order of magnitude than just making money. So
I don't just make toothpaste. I make toothpaste that I give one bottle of toothpaste to everyone in.
It's not necessarily CSR, but like it might be. Here's an example I can think of. So, at Game, which is a video game retailer, for those who don't know, one of the things we talked about was being in a workshop, and the question was posed: what does Game stand for? Mm-hmm. And for some reason, people started talking about things like, well, we stand for trading in old video games. We stand for our reward card. We stand for, well, no, that's not what stand for means. What's our reason for being? Mm-hmm. And I, being the pretentious wanker that I am, came up with the phrase, we're here to promote video games as a positive force in society. Mm-hmm. Okay, so in essence, you're kind of kicking it above. Mm-hmm. We make money from video games.
It's not just a utility. It's a reason to be.
There's a reason we do this.
Yes.
Which in Games example is horseshit because we're just there to sell video games. Mm-hmm. But in general, that's kind of one of the things that's kind of I suppose a relative example of purpose. And this whole conversation has come about because of a couple of things. So back in 2012, there was a study, and I probably put that word study in inverted commas, that claimed a cause and effect between a brand's ability to serve a quote-unquote higher purpose and its financial performance. So it's done by a guy called Jim Stengel. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly. Called the Stengel 50.
It's worth saying that he was the CMO of Procter & Gamble. So it's not just like some random guy that came up with something. Or to be frank, a researcher or professor or statistician or any of that. Very good at marketing. Maybe not so good at some other things.
He did work with Millward Brown, but yeah, so.
Yeah, but you know how that goes. I mean, he's the CMO of Procter & Gamble.
We're kind of giving away how we feel about brand purpose here. But so the idea was that they looked at financials of 50,000 brands, and 50 were the highest performing in terms of profit and all those kind of things. And essentially what they said was that between 2002 and 2012, they exhibited a 400% more profit than an investment in the S&P 500, which is a stock index in America. Standard & Poor, I want to say.
Yeah.
And at the time, Stengel was quoted to have said, I have always believed that great brands are built on improving the lives of people they serve. I want to prove that maximum profit and high ideals aren't incompatible, but in fact inseparable. Interesting there. If you the phrase that he uses, I wanted to prove that maximum profit.
Excuse me, sir. We have some bias present.
So if we go back to and if we haven't listened to it, I really recommend you do episode 11 of this podcast, which was an interview with Mark Razzle, who is director of data and insight at Clemenger BBDO in Melbourne. And one of the things he talked about. Scientific method is about trying to prove yourself wrong, because you can find a million ways to prove yourself right, but you need to try and prove yourself wrong to be convinced that actually, okay, well, I've exhausted every other possibility. Mm-hmm. This therefore must be the answer. So there, and then the lovely Simon Sinek. So he did apparently a famous TED talk, which I can honestly say I've never watched, but I will link to. Where he stated that people don't buy what you sell, but also why you sell it. He uses
this is the power of why is his big thing.
Exactly,
and I believe that's the name of his book as well. But like he uses this trope in a lot of different settings.
He does, and he again I think commits look. He's a hugely successful man and very rich.
But we can still make fun of him.
One of the things we talked about last week in episode 13 was about age and about grouping people together and assuming they all think the same things.
Mm-hmm.
But he kind of talks about this idea that 81% of millennials expect companies to make a public commitment to a charitable cause and citizenship. 50% of millennials say that positive customer experience is a factor. A purpose is a factor in their loyalty to brands. 61% of males are worried about the state of the world and feel personally responsible to make a difference. I'd like to point out, nowhere there has he asked Gen Z, Gen X, Boomers, anybody else how they feel about.
Yeah, he's not comparing millennials to anybody else.
So
also, I'm sorry, can I just stop for a second? So only 61% of millennials are worried about the state of the world and feel personally responsible to make a difference. What are 39% of these people doing?
Blaming Boomers.
Oh god.
So part of the problem, as you can hear, is that the study itself was flawed on very many levels. And a chap called Richard Shotton, who's a sort of behavioural scientist within marketing, well, that's his kind of oeuvre. That the whole flaw, the design of that whole thing was flawed. 8 of the 50 companies were privately listed, so that goes down to an overall figure of 42. A third of those listed were parts of companies or subsidiaries of companies. So, Innocent Smoothie has a purpose. And we know it's working because Coke's as a holding company has grown so much.
Yeah, so in other words, if you read a 10K, which is a financial statement in the US, Coca-Cola doesn't say Innocent Smoothies grew X% in general. Like sometimes they'll pull stuff to the fore in the narrative or whatever, but in general, they're pulling data that doesn't even apply to the company.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's ridiculous.
And Innocent is I would wager, a pretty small percentage. For those, again, of you who don't know, so Innocent was a brand that was started in, I think it's a UK company, built around the idea of sort of, I suppose, health and smoothies and all that kind of stuff. Huge amounts of sugar.
Kind of a weird name for
they
smoothies.
They don't add it, but the idea is innocent, kind of like it's all fresh, it's all, whatever. Anyway, and if you look at the ideals on the brands on the list, there's some issues there as well. A lot of them are so vague, you could apply them to any particular brand. So if you do get a chance, and I'll link. He kind of pretty comprehensively dissects the concept of brand purpose being a thing, and the idea that there being a causal effect with adopting a purpose and having a purpose and making a load of extra money.
Yes. So let's unpack that slightly. So I have to recommend a book to everybody, which is probably, it's Byron Sharp's favorite business book, which is why I picked it up in the first place. So it was like, I have my problems with Byron Sharp, but let's see why he likes this book so much. I have a real problem with Kindle books. I have way too many.
You do.
I believe there's a Japanese word for that, where you have too many books and they stack up and you never read any. I always forget the word.
Hoarding.
But there is a word. There is a word for that.
Hoarding, I think.
It's not hoarding. I want to improve my mind. Anyway, so it's a book called The Halo Effect. And it'd be Rosenweig, I believe is the guy's last name. He's a professor, a very well-respected one, and basically went through a lot of these marketing studies and things. And this one in particular, I feel like he spent some time on, where he's saying it's basically like a self-selecting group. So it's like looking at gold medalists, like Olympic gold medalists, and saying, what are the things that all these people do in common that make them Olympic gold medalists, and not looking at anybody else. So in other words, maybe they all drink coffee in the morning. Oh my God, I've got to drink coffee in the morning if I want to be an Olympic athlete. But it doesn't look at people who haven't exercised a day in their life who also drink coffee in the morning. Yeah. So this is the problem, is when you take a self-selecting group of someone, something, some brand that's successful, and you look for commonalities, there's no control. There's no way. Well, guess what? Do you know, I can very confidently say that 100% of purpose-driven brands have employees. Oh my God, employees are the reason why we need purpose-driven brands.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? Every other company has employees too. So this is a very low-hanging fruit example, but you see my point.
Absolutely. And I think that bit about if he'd have looked at the 500 and gone, okay, how many of these can I safely say have purpose?
Yes.
And what are they doing in terms of there might be a little bit more sort of validity to what's happening.
It's interesting because it reminds me of it's like I feel like now you can't really start a startup or a brand or something without having some Tom's Shoes thing kind of bolted onto it. It's like every brand you see is we're going to sell toothpaste, but we're going to give away half the toothpaste. Or we're going to sell toothpaste, we're going to donate a bunch of our proceeds, which is fine. But in a lot of ways, it doesn't feel like it's, even to a startup, it's authentic to the brand. It might be starting from the beginning, but it feels like they need to do it. It doesn't feel like they're really starting the company with a mission to serve a community in mind.
Agreed. And I think your point about bolt-on is a key point here. So authenticity is a wanky word you'll hear a lot, but I think is really important in this context. And the idea of authenticity is a great definition. So attributes which contribute to brand authenticity include the original source of production, a sense of history, sincerity of purpose, key point, timelessness, quality of production, traditions that remain over time, and a dismissal of commercial motivations.
Exactly. So it doesn't cost, what did you say? A principle isn't a principle until it costs you something. I didn't say that. Bill Bernbach said that. Well, Bill Bernbach had some good ideas.
He was a very smart man.
The 60s. But I think that is the key bit, is because, look, I'll just say, I did spot someone's Twitter bio this week that said, brands will lead the revolution.
Oh, for the love of God.
And I'm sorry. Don't abdicate responsibility for changing the world to a bunch of corporations that... That's not why they exist. It's not what they're going to do.
No.
Lead the revolution yourself, please.
I love this. The best way to know if purpose is authentic is whether purpose predated the marketing. If you've built a company around a belief, then it makes absolute sense to keep talking about that. And I don't disagree with any of that. And I think both Jen and I would also not disagree with, companies doing good things in the world. That's not a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. They should.
I think one of the problems comes though with rank hypocrisy. And I think a lot of people have suddenly started talking about purpose because of this idea that maybe it can make us make a bit more money and maybe our brand will stand out, and that's not the point of purpose. Or certainly as it's defined here. And I think the problem comes when a brand bolts on purpose and then their behaviors don't live up to the ideals. There are plenty of companies that do, and we'll come to that later on in the podcast, but brands like a Starbucks or who purport to talk about the community, but then don't pay. They're not doing anything illegal, by the way, when I say this. But they're using loopholes and tax codes and things like that to not pay as much tax as maybe they should do.
It's sort of
in certain areas.
It's sort of the Trump equivalent for a company, right? Because that's Trump's whole thing. Oh, I'm smart. I didn't pay a lot of taxes. But the thing is look, and I speak as an American. I think this is not a uniquely cultural thing, but I think something that you see a lot in American corporate culture and American culture in general is, it's my money and the government's going to try to sneak it away from me. So if I can hide it for them, I'm smart. Not the other flip side of that, which is taxes are the thing that we pay so that our society is good, so we can educate people and build roads and, maybe make the whole world better. So in short, pay your fucking taxes.
Exactly.
Please.
And I think that consistency of behavior, because that's commercial, that point, but it costs you something.
Yes.
And there's other great examples, like everyone remembers. Was it Kendall Jenner or it's Kendall, wasn't it?
It's Kendall. Kylie is the one I follow on Instagram.
But Kendall's the one
with the lip stuff.
Let's gloss over that. But the Kendall,
she has a good Instagram.
Jenner was the one with the Pepsi ad, wasn't it?
Yes. So she's the one who's like a runway model. Yes. So yes, she handed.
She
did
the one with the Pepsi, and it was all like diversity and Pepsi.
Well, it was I believe it was like a protest that was turning the wrong way, and she handed a Pepsi to a policeman, and she ended all the strife.
And I think there's a I'm going to use an example here that you can't. There's a great phrase. I forget who said it, but you can't communicate your way out of a problem you behaved your way into.
Yes, that is a great quote, and I can't remember where it's come from. We'll Google and link to it.
And I'll give you an example. So there's or a kind of an analogy, I guess. So bear with me because this goes a bit off the rails. Okay. There used to be a footballer called David James,
a soccer player.
He's still alive. He's not dead. He's just retired. David James was a goalkeeper. So his job was to stand in front of the goalie, was stand in front of the goal, and to prevent balls going in the net and keep a clean sheet for his team. And he was a very good goalkeeper. But early on in his career, he had a habit. So a ball would come across into his area. He would try and jump up to grab it, and he would drop it. He wouldn't keep hold of it. And goals were scored off the back of this and all that kind of stuff. So he ended up with the nickname Calamity James.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, it is good line, but it haunted his career. So no matter what he did to do better, and he played for my team, Aston Villa, also the team of Tom Hanks and Prince William, and he played for us, and I watched him make some amazing saves. He was a fantastic goalkeeper, played for England. He was really, really good. He could have 4 seasons of being amazing, not dropping anything. First ball he drops, forget about it. It went back to Calamity James. And I think the same, there are certain brands that would have to be so pure for so long that to live to that purpose for so long that they just can't do it. Like banks are a great example. Like banks, some banks, you might see, okay, they're doing something good in the community and that's great. But then when interest rates change, and it goes up, all of a sudden the interest rates go up. And when the interest rates go down, you don't see it go back down, do you? So they're putting profit ahead of purpose. And that's fine if you want to do that. Just don't purport to have then a purpose, a higher ideal than that. It's
an interesting thing that you're putting out there too with like the nickname story. So there's a great book called The Undoing Project. So it's basically Michael Lewis, who wrote Moneyball and a couple of these other like The Big Short. He wrote this book about Kahneman and Tversky. So the two guys that had this new kind of behavioral science, things that are very popular now in marketing. And he talked about in the intro the power of a nickname. And it's interesting because I think what you're saying about brands kind of applies. And it was, he talked to, God, I'm going to have to go. I obviously have read this book a couple weeks ago, but I'm trying to remember exactly. I think it was Miami Heat.
All right. NBA
the basketball team. And the guy who was brought in to be the GM, so the general manager, and was running basically the process that they go through to get new basketball players onto the team. And you'd have scouts and you'd have people. There's a whole team within the coaching staff that basically their whole job is to evaluate new players. And he said what he found was that a nickname would kill a prospect, because usually they were giving them a nickname like you're talking about, like Calamity James, which is not a good nickname. No. And he banned nicknames, and he found that when he did that, the actual quality of the people he was recruiting to the team went way up, because it's the power of a label. It's confirmation bias. Yeah. So all of a sudden, this is back to your point about brands having to change for a long time. If in your mind, Nestle is like the most evil company that's ever existed, it's confirmation bias. Even if they do good stuff, you're going to think back to their CEO saying that water is not a human right.
Yeah, or they do one negative thing, and all of a sudden all the good stuff goes away.
Exactly. So I think maybe this speaks to, sorry, old brands, but for newer brands, like kind of building their company and all of that. I mean, it's high stakes for your behavior.
Oh, absolutely.
Because consumers will get an idea in their mind, like Whole Foods, whole paycheck. Everybody calls Whole Foods whole paycheck. Doesn't matter who bought it. Doesn't matter. Amazon, it's cheap. It will always be whole paycheck to everyone.
That's a good name.
That's a warning, I guess, to brands is like, walk that talk, because people know when you don't.
I think the other thing when you look at some of the purpose stuff is that some of the purposes or the lines you read are so either A, nonsensical, or B, like bland. And I'm going to read something from Professor Mark Ritson, one of my favourite sort of marketing pundits.
Mark Ritson, you're invited to our podcast at any time.
I mean, look, that would be amazing.
We'll zoom you in.
From, where does he live? He lives in
I don't know.
Tasmania. Lives in rural Tasmania.
We will zoom you in.
Not that I've stalked him or anything. He just did a video
he
thing
talks
from
about
his,
it.
from
I just
his
can't ever remember.
Office. Yeah. Anyway, so I'm just going to read this. So he was talking about, he was at a conference in Stockholm. It's about a year ago, I think. And an attendee, a Swedish attendee, asked him about Verizon's new brand purpose. So Verizon telecom carrier in America. And what the statement actually meant. So he hadn't heard what it was. And so the person said their new purpose was humanability.
Humanability.
To which he replied, excuse me, he replied, sputtering into his coffee. So that, as it turns out, is the new stated purpose for Verizon. So and so the person said, what do you think, what does that actually mean? And to which he said, it means they don't know what the fuck they're doing. Humanability. Any ideas?
So I think probably this started in a good place and then quickly deteriorated once they couldn't figure out a unique way to state the brand purpose. And look, having history in telecom, I can tell you what Verizon and sort of AT&T and all of them are really afraid of is becoming a dumb pipe. That was always the language you'd hear around that time.
That's why I in the first place.
So a lot of the marketing at that time was about like how telecom systems can sort of facilitate human activity. So like Verizon had a lot of stuff about like smart farms, things like that. But honestly, like I can tell you probably what exactly happened. This is complete conjecture, but I bet, having done some things like this, a bunch of strategists sitting around in a room for like 48 hours, they can't figure out how to do this unique spin on brand purpose. So they all go to the bar. And at the bar, they start doing shots. And after about 4 or 5 shots, somebody goes, so what about humanability?
It's ability and humans put together.
Humans and abilities, and we're making this
together.
And somebody went, beautiful. High five, bro. And they high-fived, and then they put it in the deck. And there was a beautiful video with like a woman with like a husky voice doing a version of like Black Hole Sun or something.
Some acoustic, I swear to
Rock.
God, can we move past the concept of a sort of stripped down, reimagined version of an acoustic, breathy female voice version of an 80s classic for advertising, please.
And then at the end, humanability came up. And listen, I make fun of that, but those videos are very effective.
They are.
They work. Sometimes like a tear comes to your eye and you're like, damn it, why is this happening? But, listen.
Oh, that's my defense.
That's exactly what happened.
I was pitching once in Melbourne, and we made the client cry. Well, prospective client cry.
That's pretty good.
Get it. So
wow.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a whole nother. Pitches is a whole nother episode of this podcast that will be coming up.
Pitches, bitches.
Pitches.
I'm hopeful that we'll have some guests on the podcast the next couple of weeks, and we can talk a bit about it with people who've really lived it as well as us. There's a couple of other things to talk about, I think, from a purpose perspective. One of the things is, if you're going to get people to try and think about that stuff, it creates cognitive effort, right? And everything we know about how people buy brands and the kind of concept of mental availability and memory and all those kind of things.
Physical availability. Sometimes, despite your best efforts and your millions and billions spent on marketing, the reason people buy from you is because there's a lot of you. Like the Starbucks strategy.
But the point is, you don't want people to really, in a way, you don't really want people to think about. You want to just come to mind and be. Yes. And if you're asking people to think about, well, they do this environmental thing, or they have this purpose, or they do this, or blah, blah, blah. Like, you're adding in too many layers of complexity to a degree.
Yeah, it's kind of like the supercenter strategy, right? Like it's, I should just go to Walmart, or I should just go to Target, or I should just go to Asda, or whatever. But it's the idea that like the first thing that comes to mind when you buy toothpaste is this kind of toothpaste. I've always used that kind of toothpaste, or Tide detergent, or whatever.
And the other thing was this bit about, and again, this goes back to what we talked about last week, about millennials and Gen Z. They say they care about purpose and all that sort of stuff. But there's a great line here. If you ask someone if they donate to charity, 100% of people say yes. If you then compare that to actual charitable income, we notice a difference. There's no denying that there is ethical behaviour, but you would think we were more generous than we actually are if you believed at face value people's claims.
So this is, it's kind of back to the commitment and consistency stuff. So like the Cialdini, this is one of the most powerful things that they see across a lot of different cultures, which is like basically what you say in front of people. There's more to it, but like what you say in front of people, you kind of commit to. And there's a lot of like social stakes when you make even when you answer a survey that you just know one person's going to see. You change your behavior. What you say and what you do are two different things. Focus
groups sometimes they can be really powerful for certain things, but a lot of the times people say, would you do this? Yes, of course I would.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. And that's why one of the reasons, you talk about the polling for 2016's presidential election. All the polls had Hillary
3%,
winning.
3%, I think, or 6% is what they had Trump at.
I think at the start of the night, wasn't it like a 98% chance that Hillary was going to win, and then at the end of it, Trump had won. It was such a huge shift. But anyway, and I think I think what we've talked about is the idea of purpose, in the sense of it'll make extra money for you if you just adopt a purpose, if you bolt something on, etc., is flawed. Now, I want to be absolutely clear. What we're not saying is that brands shouldn't do good things for people. Mm-hmm. What I think we're saying is, if you're going to have a purpose, live it. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to use that purpose in your marketing and to try and change the way that people think about you and your brand, or create a more positive feeling in people's minds about you and your brand, you have to live to that purpose. And sometimes that purpose might mean, harking back to another episode, a sacrifice in terms of commercial to prove this sense of purpose. And there are brands who do a really great job of it. We talked a lot about Patagonia. Now there is a brand. And I think the reason they talk about it so much is because it's just an outlier. It's a brand that absolutely lives to date its values. In terms of they're trying to convince you to repair old garments rather than buying new ones. They actively push you not to buy new stuff. It's like fix this or don't fix this or donate your old one. Or I think they don't participate in things like Black Friday and those kind of consumerist.
I don't know about Patagonia. I do know that REI, which is, I guess, technically a Patagonia competitor, sort of. I get, Patagonia is slightly more upmarket. REI started the sort of like opt outside. I think it was in 2015, maybe slightly earlier. But they've done it now for like 5 or 6 years in a row. So they close on Black Friday, which for retail, I mean, look, you don't see it so much in the UK. In the US, like there's fistfights over TVs and stuff. I've done Black Friday a few times. It's an opportunity for retail places to make a lot of money in a very short span of time. So basically what REI said, though, is because Black Friday happens after Thanksgiving. So it's the day after... Yes, after Thanksgiving. Sorry, I've lived in the UK too long now. It's the day after Thanksgiving, so that's a day people a lot of times would be spending with their family because you've traveled someplace for Thanksgiving. Yeah. I'm just setting the American context. You've driven 14 hours to someone's house, as I used to do from Georgia. Yeah. Drive 14 hours to somebody's house. You have Thanksgiving. You spend the night, and then get up in the morning. And everybody who works in a retail establishment has to go to work, but you, well, you're out buying things. So REI basically said, we're going to pay everybody, but we're just going to close because that's a day we feel like people should spend with their family.
Again, I think there are other brands. Here's a weird one, like Tesla. So Tesla's mission is to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy. I think it used to be transport, not energy, but obviously they've kind of branched out a little bit from there. Now, I think Elon Musk can be a bit of a dick, but I would argue that Tesla do live to their, that's what Tesla's there for. Yeah. Tesla don't make a huge amount of money. They're not making loads of profit as far as I'm aware. I don't think they are, relative to a Ford or whatever. And he invests his money back into trying to make the cars better. And I think, regardless of what you think about Elon Musk, I don't think he's driven by commercial as much as he realizes he needs a commercially profitable venture to continue doing what he's doing. But I don't think that's why he does what he does.
It's interesting. Someone described him once on the internet as, it's as if someone is possessed by the soul of an 1800s oil baron and a 13-year-old boy. Like both shoved into one person.
Nice.
I think that's a great way to describe Elon Musk. And yes, I do think he's got a higher mission for Tesla.
There's a couple of other examples. So Vita Coco, who are a coconut water company, created the Vita Coco project to reinvest profits in the communities they source from the Philippines and Sri Lanka.
Yeah, I might actually recommend a podcast for them. So there's a great podcast called How I Built This, and the guy who founded Vita Coco talks about the whole process that they went through to found the brand. It's a great podcast.
I think the other thing about purpose we need to talk about is the idea that purpose doesn't have to be... It's interesting the way it's phrased. It's always phrased as a higher ideal other than profit, which is interesting. Does it have to be that, or can it be something else? Something that why isn't making money, a laudable goal these days? And I think there's a question around. I think the issue there is, and we talk about this a lot, especially if you're a PLC, the idea of making a profit. I don't think anyone's got a problem with maximizing profit. Leads to all sorts of shady behavior.
So I'll give you an example. So Everlane is a clothing brand that basically creates they have very transparent pricing. You can see and sort of virtually tour all of their factories where they make the clothes. And I think that's a good example of to maximize profit, they would just ship everything out to the cheapest factory they can find in India or wherever, China, and make everything. Instead, what they've done is they do have things that are sourced outside of the U.S., outside of Europe, but they're very transparent. They pay a living wage. And the thing is like they also are passing savings on to customers. So in a way, they've combined those two things. They've combined purpose and a commercial aim. And to me, that seems like a very authentic type of purpose. And for me, like looking for brands like that, I don't want to support fast fashion because I think, there's a lot of like ethical issues. And I also don't want to support fast fashion because they have all these ethical issues. And then they're saying, we're going to donate 10% of our profits today to whatever charity. I'm sorry, it doesn't make up for...
No.
The way your business is structured is not ethical or purpose driven.
It's that living to your purpose.
Exactly.
And I think we're going to talk a little bit more in a minute about why purpose has kind of survived despite all this stuff. But I think the key thing, I'm hoping I'm not putting words in your mouth here, but if you have a purpose, that's great. And if your higher purpose is about helping people, helping the world, helping whatever it might be, that's fantastic. All we ask is that you live to it.
Yes.
And that you live to if there's a commercial impact, you still live to it. Yeah. And I think that's the key. So in the last part of the discussion, just wanted to talk about this idea of how brand purpose then is still talked about in these terms, despite the kind of not evidence against it, that's the wrong way of putting it, but this kind of why do people keep latching on to purpose? And one of the things that we kind of and has been talked about a lot is that I think a lot of advertisers and marketers are potentially a little bit ashamed of the fact that their job is almost to make money for the organization. Like as a marketer, your job, without question, is to make money.
It's to sell.
Yeah, it's to make more money for your company than you would that would otherwise have been there if you didn't exist. That's the whole point. But if you're working for a particular brand, or you're working for a brand that doesn't necessarily have purpose, or you don't maybe agree with everything they do, or whatever, you're looking for something else to latch onto, and a higher purpose, quote unquote, is something that people can latch onto. And I think, again, there was...
What helps build a brand, too? Like, in a way, like, if you think about Coca-Cola, like, that's a good example of a company. I mean, they're just selling sugar water, really. Yeah. And there's no difference between Coke and any other, like, generic RC Cola, Pepsi, whatever you pull off the shelf. But a part of what's building that brand is this idea of, like, the purpose-driven stuff, the brand-driven stuff.
Well, question, it's interesting, though, but is Coke's brand driven on enjoying... It's basically about enjoying company, isn't it? And being sociable and drinking together and happiness and all that sort of stuff. Which is iffy. Happiness is an iffy one because obviously the amount of sugar in those sort of drinks. But they're not necessarily saying we're changing the world like Coke. We're not making the world. We're not improving. We don't exist to solve global warming. They're not saying
that's true.
That. Whereas that's where Pepsi went so wrong. Where the Pepsi were saying, we're here to solve racial diversity and all that sort of stuff. But again, so I'm going to use sort of a bit of a line from Mark Ritson, and he said, this is his words, not mine.
Okay.
First, marketing is soft and full of people that don't even understand gross profit, let alone possess the desire to increase it.
That drives me nuts. Take one accounting class. Even if you don't understand everything, just take one accounting class, please.
Second,
everyone.
Most marketers are incredibly embarrassed to admit they spend 40 hours a week getting people to consume more of something. That's achingly uncool and sounds appallingly prosaic. Imagine telling someone at a dinner party in London, W1 he describes, which is a posh part of Wimbledon, maybe? Anyway, somewhere that way. That you work very hard to get people to drink more of your beer each week.
Yeah.
And I think that's the interesting thing. I think a lot of, having worked with a lot of creatives, they want to create art, quote unquote. Not all of them. I'm not painting everyone with the same brush, but I think there's a general thing that we create art. We do things that are a higher purpose. Like, yeah, but don't forget the fact that your whole point you exist is to make your company that you're working for more money. That's why you're there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think it's interesting because if you think about even like a show like Mad Men, which I think is a really interesting example because it's like talking about the 60s and like cultural change, but written by people many of whom had spent time in ad agencies. You can tell just by the way the show's written that they had a lot of actual people who worked in agencies. But like this whole idea of like, like the man is the account people. The man wants to make money, but look at me. I'm cool. I'm counterculture. Like I'm different. I'm interesting. I'm here to, create something that's art. I mean, even like Don Draper. Yeah. His whole thing is, he's in the body of a square, but he's like, you got a creative soul, that kind of thing. But I do think it is an interesting thing to kind of think about, like a profession. And like, look, and I haven't talked about this in the podcast before, but for many years was a creative person. I was in a creative industry. I was a classical musician. Like, I was writing music, I was doing things. And I got into advertising and eventually marketing because I saw it as a way to marry creativity and business. And I still see it that way, despite the fact that I just really like to sell stuff. I do think it's a little bit of that edge of, I get to think creatively. I'm not just filling out a spreadsheet, which if you've ever filled out a spreadsheet, can also be creative. If only someone had told me you could be creative with a business case. But, the more I've gotten into it, the more I still find that, like, the creativity is a different kind of creativity. It's a mathy creativity. It's a data creativity. It's a story creativity. But I think a lot of people get into advertising searching for an outlet for writing a novel, writing a screenplay, making a movie. And, like, that's all fine and good. But I think a lot, and again, I'm painting with a really broad brush, but I think a lot of people, especially when you're new to the industry, like, you need to create some inner peace around this idea that, like, brand purpose is not the solution for your own personal crisis of, oh shit, I should have really gone to film school, but here I am or I did go to film school and here I am.
I don't believe in what this brand is selling or talking about or whatever, Look, everyone's got their own ethical limits when it comes to the
everybody
brands
has
they
this
will
issue
and won't work on, and that's absolutely right.
I don't think there is one human person that doesn't wake up in the morning some days and go, oh, I really don't want to be here. I really don't want to be at work. I really don't want to be making something or doing something or showing up today.
I remember thinking this. I was so my sister, Dr. Amanda Dale, is works in education, and she does a lot of stuff for the local community, and she was on the parish council, and the job that she does. It's a very noble thing that she's doing, working in education. I kind of was looking at myself at the time and thinking, I'm sat here working on McDonald's, Volkswagen, and a bunch of other brands that have had, not being rude to anybody, but have had some issues in the past in terms of their perspective. And I kept thinking, Christ, this isn't a particularly noble profession that I've chosen. And then you start to think, well, maybe not, but a lot of those companies employ a lot of people, and you start to justify it in your own head, and away you go. But so again, there's nothing wrong with wanting to have that purpose, but you just have to be clear that the path you have chosen as a marketer is to make money for the company that you work for.
And I think if that's it's like Brene Brown, right? It's like, if you're not doing something that's true to yourself, it will come out in other ways. You will be angry, you'll be depressed, you might drink a little too much or party too much or try to avoid the fact that you're doing something you're not really into. And what I would say to that is, I mean, there is an inner struggle, and like I don't know if the solution for everybody is to just like, love it or get out. I mean, but it kind of might be like, if it doesn't feel like, if it feels like you're always trying to repress something, and like the purpose driven stuff is a way for you to be your true self, but the purpose of marketing and advertising is to make money, and sometimes these things aren't working together. I mean, get a life coach.
Go and find a company that,
or find
go to Patagonia.
Yeah, I mean, well, go to REI, which is impossible to get a job at because nobody ever wants to leave because it's so great. But yeah, I mean, I think think about smaller places. Think about different ways to do different things. Like maybe this is not the right path for you. So that's it for this episode of Everybody Hates Your Brand. We hope you enjoyed it. You can find show notes, resources, and more episodes on our website, everybodyhatesyourbrand.com. But before we go, let's leave on a positive note, and we'll share what we're loving right now. Rob, what you got this week?
More sort of Lesbian, Byron Sharp type stuff. So interestingly, if you read a lot of Les Binet, it's Binet actually. I found the other day. And it's saying Binet.
Yeah, is it really? I've always said
the thing
Binet.
I'm going to suggest people watch. He says Les Binet. I'm like, oh, blimey, sorry.
That was Binet and Fielding.
Anyway,
wow. Okay.
So again, for those who don't know, Les Binet is, I think, he's a director of marketing effectiveness at Adam and Eve DDB, but he's also written lots of papers and he's very well respected in kind of assessing this stuff. And one of the things he talked about in one of his, in the long and short of it, was this idea of excess share of voice. So the idea that a brand will grow if your share of voice is greater than your market share. So if you're over-investing versus your market share. And one of the problems with that idea is identifying share of voice is really difficult, especially across digital channels and lots of walled gardens, and how do you kind of find out what competitors are doing and all that kind of stuff. So he's looking at and investigating this other idea of share of search as a sort of proxy measure for share of voice. So that you can identify how your share of search is relative to your category and all those kind of things. And using that, therefore, as a way to calculate partially the effectiveness of your marketing and how that's going versus your market share size and all that kind of stuff. I won't go into a huge amount of detail because he's done a video on it and he talks about it a lot more interesting than I would. But I think it's a really interesting concept. And there's a video that I will, a YouTube video that I will link to in the show notes. So I think it's a really interesting concept of using search, which the problem I've got with it is the data that he's using is free and it goes back to 2004. I kind of get the feeling if Google find out that people are using this as a research tool, all of a sudden maybe that data will end up being charged for. But we'll see. So I'll link to that in the show notes. But I think it's a really interesting metric and maybe something worth looking at.
God, there's a great book about this that I am trying to find the title of. We will link to it in the show notes, but it's all about this. It's about this idea of like when Obama was getting elected, like what people were searching and how that was reflected in how different people were voting, despite the fact that the polls were saying one thing. He also, I believe, talks about Trump and the fact that people like share of voice for Trump or share of search was really high, and what people were searching was telling a different story than what they were telling everybody else. So I think it's an interesting sort of attached thing, but we'll link to the book. For some reason, I'm having a brain problem when it comes to actually thinking of it. Of course, it's one of those millions of books that I've read about 2/3 of and have gone in the pile.
Jennifer, what did you have? Was it Peloton or IKEA this week?
It's not either one of those. I'm hurt. I have original ideas. I mean, listen, we've had the Peloton for a while now, so it's less of a shiny object. Yeah, so basically, I saw a really interesting ad for it's a Postal Service creed for 2020. And for people who are not American, you will not know that the Postal Service in the U.S. has a creed that they sort of recite or post a lot of different places. It's, it does rain, shine, hail, whatever. Despite all of that, the Postal Service goes on. Like, it's just a thing that they live by or whatever. So basically... a
purpose, if you will.
Yes. So Ogilvy, Chicago created a spot for the United States Postal Service because they have been very embattled in the entire... There's a lot of stuff going on. If you don't read American news, I'm not going to go into all of it, but basically there's a lot of mail-in votes that have to go through the US Postal Service. And some people... I'm sure you can imagine who, have been maybe cutting some budgets and doing some things that are less than ethical in an attempt probably to, I don't want to get into politics, but basically like they've been under attack. Rob's looking at me like he knows I'm tempted, but this is not a political podcast. So let's just, I think you can tell by the tone of my voice how I feel about all of this. But basically Ogilvy, Chicago put together like their Postal Service creed for 2020, and it's basically, we'll link to it in the show notes, but it's really powerful, I think, because it's basically saying like, rain, snow, hail, but also defunding or unethical behavior or cronyism is not going to stop us from doing our job. So it's an interesting thing because you wouldn't think like the Postal Service in 2020 would become like such a hot button topic, but here we are in the world that we live in at the moment.
Without question, the stupidest year.
Yes, 2020.
Since I've been alive.
The stupidest year of our lifetimes. I think it's a good...
Just what is...
a good way to end the podcast.
Although, we wouldn't possibly be doing this podcast.
That's very true.
So, and it's been a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah. Well, you did it. You've wasted another perfectly good half an hour or so with Rob and Jen and the Everybody Hates Your Brand podcast. Again, you can find us on everybodyhatesyourbrand.com and your podcast platform of choice. Have a week.
Take great care and be vigilant.